Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Kyle Hayes. Kyle, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I know we've been going back and forth for a bit. You have an incredible background in revenue ops, but before we get going, I would love to have you take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Hayes. I'm the founding partner of Ecosystem Revenue Dynamics. I'm coming to you live-ish from the United Kingdom, and we are a boutique global consultancy that focuses on ecosystem orchestration.
So I know we were chatting right before the recording is that you started in engineering and then you kind of moved into, operations. So it would be great for you to kind of walk us through, a journey at Microsoft and Avanti and in a couple of these other companies as you sort of made the transition from engineering to program management to operations. So
thank you. Absolutely. So I've always loved technology, like how it works, how it comes together, the things that it can do. And that fascination really, when I was 5 years old, that's where it started. And as I was going through my teenage years, I was doing some, I would call it a small business, home to home sort of computer IT support. I thought, actually, I want to see how this is done in the real world, in the corporate styles. And I was very fortunate to end up at IBM, where, just an amazing experience as an IT support engineer working in a massive, large scale data center for software development. And honestly, from there, that piqued my interest. I was getting more and more involved and sort of starting to move from operating system and application to looking at code. And that's how I ended up becoming a software engineer. I was very fortunate to be at IBM for a number of years. Did some cool things. I managed to work on a couple of patents to my name, and then also work at Wimbledon, of all things. From that perspective, the good times must roll on, and so I ended up at Microsoft, as working in a client-side architect capacity, working on Office 365. And this was back in the day when Azure was a teeny tiny, little drip in the services play from a computing perspective, and SaaS was the new big thing that was sort of coming out. And I worked on SaaS migrations with a lot of different customers. And then through that journey, not only did I cut my teeth on working with partners, I also got to sort of see how the business side starts to come together from a program office and management perspective. And when I moved on from Microsoft, I was actually really fortunate to sort of go and have a look around some of the government areas, so working in one of the national parks here in the UK. And then again, fortunate enough to sort of pick up into some contracts with Amazon and looking at projects that were sort of going on in there. But I really then started to go, working in technology is fantastic, but what I'm seeing is there's a lot of miscommunication, if you will, between the business side and the tech team. And so this is why I sort of ended up at Infor, where I got to grow and continue my role as a business analyst and project manager running their PMO for education. But there was a lot of moving parts in terms of how the customers would be planned, working with the partners in terms of the enablement, the level of tech around that. And towards the middle to the end of my time at Infor, I was very fortunate to be able to go into more the RevOps side and look at the tech and how that's supported, but then also look at how that sort of ties back from a go-to-market perspective. And especially as I finished at Infor, just at what I would say the core height, if you will, as COVID was taking off, working the Infor's education team, business was booming from that side of things. And my last role was at Avanti, where I was full go-to-market from a RevOps perspective, looking at how different business units, different partners were sort of working together to ensure that we were being able to continue to grow the business. And Avanti itself was going on its own on-prem to SaaS journey. So it's been quite a wild ride, over the last sort of like 19 years in that respect, but it's been fantastic. And to be able to do what I do now and focus, purely in the channel space as an ecosystem orchestrator is not only a dream come true, but it's a blessing because they've given me so much over the years. So it's nice to be able to return the favor and give back.
So what made you start your own consulting company?
Such a good question. For me, for me, it was a very simple sort of question. I remember having a conversation with James Hodgkinson over at 360 Insights about a year ago. And we were talking about, ecosystem orchestration, how, the stage of the channel is starting to evolve and change at a rather rapid pace. But from my perspective, and James and I have gone way back, both as a client and a vendor, all the way through to friends. The bigger thing that I was sort of seeing was that there's been tech partners, as an example, will come in and we're here to implement the solution you've sold. But then clients aren't always ready. Or they go, okay, well, that's great. We're going to implement this. So we're going to implement this and make it work. But they haven't thought about the strategy behind it, the team that's going to support it, the user adoption, all those sort of core things. The other part of it is just, again, the other part of it that I've seen has been the level of complexity and what I would describe as an unknowingness of their own technical tech stack and the landscape. And for me, that's where I've gone, no, I have some experience here. I come from the tech world with the tech background. I've worked in your go-to-market and especially within RevOps. And so to look at how I can close that gap and make sure the two are aligned, I thought that there's something here that I can sort of build upon and sort of drive. And how this sort of ties back into ecosystems and channel really comes down to how I've seen and have heard from many how the ecosystem was always the last part or the afterthought of a go-to-market strategy. I think we've all seen it where sometimes, we've all seen it where revenue leaders will go, I have a gap in my pipeline and channel's going to fill it. Well, that's great, but if they're not aligned from the process and aligned from the program, and they're not seeing the value in what you're offering as a vendor, that's a problem. And so this is where I've really started to build and sort of focus that consultancy around this, from a ecosystem orchestration perspective, so we can ensure that we are aligning both the channel, the tech stack that sort of drives and empowers that, and then also how that closes the gap and making sure that channel is a core part of any go-to-market strategy.
Awesome. So let's go a couple of steps back. Let's start with RevOps. And because you're sort of someone, when I look at your career, kind of grown up while RevOps was growing, from your perspective, when do you think it started to become a buzzword? Like, it wasn't, people didn't talk about RevOps, a few years back. So when do you think the inflection point happened?
I would probably, thinking about it, obviously seeing how the industry has evolved, I would probably say around 2016. And as an example, while you and I are talking about RevOps now, and I agree, the other term that I've started to see floated about is go-to-market operations. But we can circle back to that. The way I've been looking at it is, sales operations in its corest function, right, in terms of being able to forecast, track bookings, make sure that teams are enabled, has been around since I think the late 70s. But I think that evolution of how RevOps has started to come to power, you really have to look at what revenue operations is. And in its truest sense, it is the part of the business that touches every sort of angle where revenue is generated. And especially now where technology is evolving so quickly, obviously the rise of AI, the different vendors and platforms and tools that are out there to help any sort of organization grow its business. This is where the alignment of not just a sales operations team, but your marketing operations, your customer success, your renewals, your deal desk, these all have to be in the same category so that they're singing off the same hymn sheet, but then also working to drive the vision behind the company and empower the sales and channel teams making these things work. And of course, as well as customer success. So I would definitely say 2016, based on, that level of information I've just given, but then also the rise of customer success as well.
So that's great. So when you go back and look at, rise of revenue ops, over the last 20 years or so, not all operations that generated revenue were under one umbrella. For example, when you think about automotive sector, where they generate most of their revenue, their brand, through services, part sales, etc., and aftermarket, and their profit predominantly comes from post sales of the car. Of course, in the razor industry, we know, they give away the razor blade, they make money on razor blade later on or selling other accessories. So life cycle of the customer in the old days were never managed together, right? And what you just said, then under RevOps, people try to put together everything under one umbrella. So when did things sort of start to come together in your mind? Because technology was available, people were more process focused, skills were kind of coming together under this umbrella of RevOps.
Very good question. And I completely agree. So for me, I would probably say it was around 2019. And back then, let's think digital transformation was the big buzzword of the day. And the thing that I was seeing is that obviously more disparate teams, especially as we started to go into this global pandemic, people were trying to do more with less. And especially where not only new sales were important, but the renewal, the resale, being able to cross-sell and expand within the account was becoming ever more increasing because it was easier, with the people really weren't buying new products or new services back then. From my perspective, the thing that I've found really interesting is how typically over the last sort of 6 years, is how that sort of grouping has expanded. So I would say for me initially, you may have had a business and systems tool that may have been part business intelligence, part administration of Salesforce or any other sort of field automation tools. But then outside of that, it would have been a deal desk, renewals, and your sales operations and channel. Where that started to really sort of come together, and I'd say I've seen this more frequently within the last sort of like 2-3 years, is where marketing operations is now being moved out of that marketing pillar and driving in. And the same with customer success. Because you already have renewals in there, and customer success is starting to become tightly aligned, even to the levels of professional support, maybe some even professional services as well. And part of that evolution, as I think about how technology's become more freely available, AI is becoming more prevalent, is really being able to say we are aligned on our customer journey. Both from, if we think about a lead or the intent signaling coming in right at the beginning from somebody brand new, all the way through to how they've been, fostered as a lead, grown into an opportunity, won the contract, implemented success. Today, with the level of data that we've had, and this goes back to data points that we've seen increasing massively over the last 15 years, it's just been tremendous. So the amount of data that we have has never been more important, and being in alignment as a team, under one roof, so to speak, has made that so much easier to help coordinate and structure. I think where we see some disparity from that today, where organizations may not have, to use my phrase, all their ducks in a row, if you will. That's where there can be a lot of underlying data issues, partly through they're trying to restructure, they've gone through an acquisition, but all the way through to they have a lot of technical debt as well. And so while you see there's a concerted effort to drive and to be more aligned, that can be more challenging where there are people have come in, people have left, knowledge hasn't been retained as well as it could have. And you have, data governance, which is trying to catch up with the level of data and the level of data and intent signals that sort of exist today versus when they did, even 5 years ago, not even 10.
So the two major changes that you just said, or inclusion rather, you just referred to, which is pulling in marketing ops and then pulling in customer success, including professional services under one umbrella of RevOps. When you think about from a workflow perspective, how complex is that stack becoming? Because, marketing itself is using 7 or 8 different tools, right? Sales is using, I don't know, maybe a dozen tools, like DocuSign, CRM, quotes tools, CPQ, like you can name it, right? And then they have their own commission tools. If they have revenue sharing with an alliance, you have another set of tools. So in a typical RevOps stack, for $100 million company or $1 billion company, how many tools are there, you think, in this stack end to end?
I love the question. I mean, I would say, and honestly, I'm going to say this is a partly loaded question, because I would say it really depends on the landscape of the company itself. So if it's been natural growth, there could be a tendency to sort of have around 50 to 60 applications. But if it's a company that has grown through rapid acquisition or mergers, that landscape could be upwards of 130 applications. It's mad, it's crazy, and that becomes so hard to try and navigate from an end user perspective. What should I do where? But it also comes very hard to administer, maintain, but more importantly, and the key thing that I look at is how do you then integrate all of these tools? How do you then while you have like a consistent customer journey up at the top, how do you then make sure that aligns both from a technology standpoint where you're getting all the right data points, everything is feeding to the right things, and so that you have a consistent journey across the board? That for me is like the bigger challenge and issue that I'm seeing rise as we sort of go through this. But yeah,
so when you look at from just on the direct sales side, if you're somewhere between 50 to 150 tools for $1 billion or $2 billion company, and then they have their own bugs, they have their own issues, data integration issues between the flow. Do you see enough investments going into sort of people power perspective to make, because they don't run themselves, right? Somebody has to operate them. So what % of revenue ops in your mind roughly go into this sort of IT infrastructure management from a headcount perspective? If you have to guess.
Oh, so if I was to guess, I would say typically from what I've seen it's normally around 3 to 4 people from the numbers you provide.
Or what sort of revenue?
So for that sort of revenue, you'd probably be looking at around 200 million. Now, I'm going to go out there and say that's not enough, and the figure that I look at when I think about how big a RevOps team should be holistically, there are two sort of benchmarks I think of. One is like 10% of your revenue should equate to the total sum for your FTE count for your RevOps team. The other framework I look at is then for every one RevOps person, there should be a ratio of about 1 to 15, the 15 being your quota carrying people, be it BDR, SDR, account executive, even customer success. If they're quota carrying, that should be a strong ratio in place. But depending on the complexity, and more often than not, the people who are sort of trying to manage the systems, either from a strategic standpoint or from a day-to-day perspective, that they're understaffed, because there's so much that needs to be done in terms of maintaining the existing environment, but then also trying to move the business forward. And that's a lot of challenges that companies of that size will face today.
So let's keep doing the math, right? Because I don't get to talk to someone like you, and I love this part. So because this is where the ROI opportunity comes in from a CRO perspective, they got to look through the lenses of math, right? So let's say 200 million, right? Okay. That's the revenue. It's sort of direct sales. We'll come to the partner sales later on. 30, 40, 50, 100K, SEV, right? So you're possibly doing, a few thousand net new or gross new transactions, and most of it is coming from install base, right? Mm-hmm. So in that operations, what is the number of rough headcount? If you say maybe $1.5 million to 2 million per rep, what's the BDR structure looks like? How many people now in RevOps? You said about 4 people in RevOps. So I would like to sort of kind of spell out the headcount, then talk about this 30 to 50 apps cost structure, because that's also a cost, right? And then we'll go to AI, what it can or cannot do that. So kind of frame that out for us, Kyle.
Absolutely. So I should say the 3 to 4 number is purely from an admin tooling perspective.
These are sysadmins. They are like the admin. They're like add moves and changes, sitting down, doing business analysis, mapping out the flow, configuring on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, doing the Lord's work. Keeping the system lights on and moving forward. From a team perspective in terms of RevOps itself, given those sort of numbers, let's say, 10 to 15 people, realistically. The biggest challenge that I sort of see from this as we go through is it's not just, a checkbox exercise in terms of like, well, we have this amount of headcount. It's definitely a core part. It's something that obviously the board is going to look at, the CFO is going to look at to make sure that they're seeing a good ROI in terms of, how they manage. The biggest thing is making sure that you have those absolutely required roles and sort of important functions covered. Now, I've seen this in a variety of different ways where the sales ops team, as an example, can be light, which means the other part of that is then, okay, well, do they have all the necessary tools and data that they need? Thinking more about business intelligence, having one source of truth, etc., to sort of track and see. A lot of this comes down to historics, so how the company's evolved and grown, where what I would call, like, obviously the P&L each year for that sort of company. But if we take the example of 200 million, I'm going to say 200 million. So if we're going to say about 10 to 15 people, depending on location, geographics, all those good things, it's absolutely important to make sure that each of those roles that you have for revenue operations is clarified. They know what they do, they know what they should be, in sort of sync with, and not just from and I should say, this is how I view the world. From the people, the process, the tech, and the data, all of them have to be aligned. Who works with what? Who owns what? How do those processes sort of tie together? Because in a company of that size with that sort of team, automation is going to be absolutely critical. And you can't automate if you don't have the right processes or tools in place. And if the data is not in the great state, and I'm sure, as we all know, like, data can vary from company to company, wild ends of the spectrum, it can be very hard and also generate a lot of that pain as they go through. So it's definitely, I still sort of go through the rhetoric of, RevOps is the unsung hero of the organization when it comes to it, with the challenges that they have to manage and sort of surpass as well.
So when you take that complexity, right? So there is a mandate in enterprise, even in mid-market SME companies, to reduce the stack, simply because complexity, because more things break, more you introduce, and you really don't get the ROI beyond a certain point. And I saw an analyst report, they did surveys in enterprise, 5,000 employees and larger, and the IT organization thought they have 150 apps, but on an average, enterprises have 641 apps. So they don't even know how many apps they have because they have all these rogue departments buying apps. So when you come back to sort of SME mid-market, do you see there's a push towards integrated platform, or do you see people like what trend do you see before we even get into this AI agentic discussion?
So the trend I sort of see in that sort of like that mid-market perspective is and I think the term back in the day was like shadow IT. There's a lot of that going on. A really good example there would be LinkedIn Sales Navigator, where a lot of salespeople can just go, I've done this and I'm off, and there we go. And there is a lot of that going on. And that's harder to track initially because that'll go through FP&A as expenses. There's definitely a push to sort of be aware of the costs going on, but the mentality can often be like, we just need to be able to do the thing, and then we'll circle back and think more strategically about the overall view of how we move from here to there. That's quite common across the board. A better approach, and sometimes the tougher sort of sell in that respect, is thinking more strategically in terms of long term. I see a lot of clients have come to me and they've said, well, we want to buy this tool. And this is a common scenario where you go, there's been a new senior leader of some description, and I'd like to buy this tool. Great. Why? And it's not always led with, because I need to be able to see X, Y, and Z, or this particular requirement. It's because normally, and unfortunately, it's because I used it at my last company. So, okay, but how that company would have been structured, set up, managed, run, all those good things is going to be entirely different to how your current organization operates and works. And so to have that same experience, that same tool, is potentially could be a huge uplift on the team that already has a day-to-day workload to manage. So the biggest thing that, again, that we'll take away from this, I would say, is like you have to think more strategically in terms of what are you trying to achieve, versus going around and looking at which tools would be best to buy. What I would like to call like product bingo from that side of things.
So I want to go back to a little bit the process framework that you're alluding to before, that sales processes and then marketing processes, customer, these are all processes. So when I dial back about 20 years ago, maybe even a little bit earlier, the biggest thing on process was Six Sigma, then Lean Sigma, then lean processes. There was some discussion of lean selling. I don't know what happened to that. But nevertheless, when it comes to operational framework, do you think CROs, the exposures that you have had, are they process people, or like what is your frame of mind? Or are they trying to put teams together that breaks down the workflow? From a business analysis perspective, where do you think the industry maturity is in mid-market today?
So one of the biggest things that I'm sort of seeing as I look across, the clients that I work with, the conversations that I sort of get into where they want to address things, you're seeing that mentality change away from like focusing more on sales to thinking about, okay, well, how do we make it easier? And what I mean by that is like the biggest thing that a CRO is that I've seen from my perspective has always been, how do I reduce the level of administration that my team are doing? Because it's too much. And I understand that, because realistically, at most, you want a salesperson to be able to look at 3 tools, like your sales enablement / intelligence, your CRM, and a productivity suite. That's pretty much it, because you want them to be empowered to go and do the best thing that they do, sell. And so the more, if the house isn't tidy, and there's a lot of processes that are disjointed, if there's a lot of manual steps involved, that makes every part of their job harder. And that's where I'm sort of starting to see like the bigger pivot from a CRO perspective, going, how can we sort of resolve this so we keep these guys free of the administration that they're having to do on a day-to-day basis?
So when you think about, and I think that's a great thought, is like when you think about evolution of CRM, they were pretty much like a thing on their own. Then Salesforce came about and they introduced this notion of platform, right? That we're sort of a major data flow platform and you plug in different things. Then HubSpot went to the next direction. They said, you know what? We actually plug in 5 things together as a unified suite so that you don't have to plug in core applications from a marketplace. You can add other things to it. So from your experience, because you have worked in very large companies and you're consulting with SMEs, do you think SMEs are in a better position because they don't have that level of complexity of a Microsoft or an Avanti even, that they can execute more of a revenue ops vision in a scale that enterprise is very difficult to do?
Absolutely. And the term that we sort of used, back at Microsoft was like looking at global players like that. They're often viewed as oil tankers. So they see they need to change, but they're slow to turn. And this is the massive benefit, of this space. These guys can be much faster to react and be able to move more effectively. And again, like especially with the evolution of the tools that are there today, the level of flexibility, functionality, and what I'm going to say as well as integration that exists. That means very quickly you can adapt, you can do a POC, you can trial, and you can get moving with an application. The downside to that can be obviously cause and effect, where you may end up with a landscape of tools that developed rapidly from a POC perspective. They're in place now, but they haven't quite met the mark or the need, or didn't get the right level of change management and user adoption training required, and therefore can add to a level of tech debt that exists today.
So if I sort of bring in AI and then I'll go to PartnerOps, do you think, is it all hype that's being talked about on agentic AI? Because when I think about this 30 to 50 stack for a $200 million company, that's complex. We have less tools in development organizations pumping out code possibly for a $200 million company than what you're saying on the revenue upside, how many tools they have to handle. And on the development side, we have engineers who are more process driven and structured and data driven than when you think about, sales organization traditionally. So do you see AI is going to simplify this thing, or is it going to add more to the complexity?
Honestly, it's a bit of both. And so the reason why I say that is, if you think about AI as it stands today, with the fantastic platforms that are they're emerging, they offer a huge amount of functionality and a lot of ease. So you can drive automation, you can refactor roles into a certain extent, and that's going to be a lot of ease of use right across the go-to-market stack. The difficulty that's going to bring in is going to be around what level of data requirements are required from the AI vendor, and then also what sort of policies are in place, both from a data compliance, privacy, and security perspective when being implemented. And I say that because I've seen a lot of tools where they go, "This is great. Here are the requirements," and the data requirements of the company are not necessarily in the right frame of mind, so to speak, or the data governance isn't really there to sort of achieve what's needed, and that can create bad reviews, bad experiences, etc. My biggest takeaway so far with the experience that I've had with AI and the studies that I've been looking at and sort of doing myself really is, whatever pilot POC you sort of put in, you need to ensure you have a clearly defined use case as to what you're trying to achieve with it, and then making sure that the data requirements match what you have today, or the uplift to sort of get there isn't as much as it would need to be.
But is it fair to say that you will need more engineer on the revenue side, that revenue engineering, which has been a buzzword, but unless you have structured thinking, because when you're trying to deploy an agent, you need a relatively high degree of skill set, and that agent has to evolve. So you can't not just deploy and walk away. So what is your take of tech requirement in a CRO organization?
I'm so glad you said that. So it is higher, it is increased. And I know there are a lot of reports at the moment from the industry analysts saying that tech spend is being increased. But with that, you have to have the people to support it. And for me, you hit the nail on the head. You can't just say, "Oh, we've implemented, it's done, thank you very much." You have to maintain, you have to iterate, and for me, that's a principle within any platform or solution that you implement, but that's definitely true with AI, because it has to learn. Whether it's a blended model, whether you're either leveraging an existing LLM or a proprietary one, or even using your own, that has to be maintained and updated. And I think one of the big things we'll see in RevOps over the coming months, in the next 2 years, is how that role of a RevOps engineer is starting to become a thing and exist, especially where prompt engineering is starting to grow quite rapidly as well.
When we started 7 years ago, kind of based on the thesis that you're just talking about, the direct side, with the exact similar thesis on the indirect side, on the channel side. So that's why in our platform, we have 18 applications. They run on our core admin framework. So it's very similar to buy Salesforce and buy individual apps from an app exchange, but we provide that in a unified way, right? So there is no integration required. So now when you think about the partner side of the dynamics, right? Because these companies, just on the direct side, for a $200 million org, they have, you're saying 30 to 50 apps. What do you see on the partner side? How many tools do they have if they're selling through the channel?
Honestly, so typically, again, it'll be sort of 3 to 5 applications that a vendor will sort of have in place, potentially for their channel. The biggest thing isn't necessarily about the number of tools. It's more around the level of a complexity that they've got, or if it's not a seamless integration. And what I mean by this is, again, using the analogy of going direct sales, right? You want them to touch 3 systems. Realistically, it's very similar for a channel partner, but even more so, it needs to be simple, it needs to be engaging, it needs to be positive, and it needs to be easy. And if you're, as a basic example, if you're not using SSO to sort of connect these systems together so there's only one login, if you're pointing them all over the place and there's no coherent view or way for them to see how they're performing, how they're engaging, that's a risk. And again, especially with a channel partner that is a great and amazing extension of your own sales team to sort of help grow your company and the revenue, you want to be working with them to ensure that they're engaged, they're happy, they're working with you. It's the term I'm going to say is like, it's a partnership for a reason. There has to be buy-in from both sides, and so that's where this this feedback circle and being able to iterate and improve and refine is so important, especially in an ecosystem.
So the 4 to 6 applications that you kind of see in a mid-market on the partner side, what are those in your mind that you typically see?
So typically, I would say it's normally like a PRM instance of some description, and that may just have the bread and butter of a deal registration, lead management, if leads are being referred out, and then so that's one. Then I'd say an LMS training platform of some description. Maybe there's a data visibility, so a tooling that allows them to see how they've performed, how they're doing. And then typically it'll be a license or support portal so they can log tickets on behalf of customers. Those are sort of the big ones that I sort of genuinely see. And it can be more fractional than that, but those are the big ones I see.
So I want to kind of double click on that, leads deal side. There's a lot of buzzword also, like AI and agents in co-sell, right? So I'm trying to visualize 4 mid-market brands and maybe a large company working together to put together a solution stack. So collectively they have 400 applications. I don't know what the count is going to be. Maybe there's some overlaps. Maybe they use Salesforce or HubSpot at a core. Then you have partner organization. Maybe there are 4 or 5 partner working on a deal. So from a RevOps engineering perspective, are we trying to solve how big the galaxy is? Like, what are we trying to solve here?
I'm with you. And this is where partner operations is so important, because they can help manage that burden. Now, in a modern revenue operations team, they should be a core part of all of that and be helping there, and even to the extent of having their own team to sort of manage their tech components. But this really comes down to how well each of those applications integrates, how well connected they are. But as this grows, as more technology evolves, new platforms come out, new solutions, this is going to be a key part that the business is going to have to invest in, not just from a tech perspective, but the underlying support for those sorts of applications. And even as I say that, today I see as PRM applications are sort of installed and managed, a lot of them still treat it as we're done, it's set up, it's stood, there we go. And when they think about not just the logistics in terms of maintaining it, supporting it, updating it, there's also the components of, okay, well, who have we got from product marketing? Who have we got from the education team? Who have we got from support? What program updata do we need to go? And making sure that those roles are covered, to ensure that everything is in alignment and sort of singing off the same hymn sheet.
So do you think where we are, if we kind of combine the direct and the indirect, when you look at Scott Brinker marketing stack, and there's someone else stack, the sales stack, they have exploded, right? There are 15,000 applications. So going back to the galaxy or universe analogy, do you think the expansion has sort of matured? Now it's going to start shrinking and eventually it'll bring down to a highly dense star? Like where are we in that cycle of innovation?
I would say we're just at the beginning. And I say that with, there's a lot more to come. Again, taking AI as a great example at the moment. There's so much evolving, and that's just from the tech perspective, right? As these use cases get more embedded, the functionality enhances, we're going to see a bigger expansion. I think where in the next sort of like 2 years, 18 months or so, where we'll start to see that maybe teeter off and we'll see more consolidation, is where those platforms start to either go, we're great, but we need to be in combination with something else. And that may start to happen from mergers and acquisitions. But I'd say at the moment we're definitely at the early beginning stage of this. And it's exciting to see, like, some of the functionality that's coming out is just like superb. But I'd say early stages at the moment.
But from an operation perspective, do you think the user, there is a level of saturation that they're reaching, that they can't handle desperate apps? They would rather have an integrated platform so they can make the data flow. Like, where is from? Because at the end, the users are going to dictate, what they can or cannot absorb, because you cannot keep on throwing headcounts at this.
No, that's very true. And this is where, things like ecosystem orchestration are so important, right? Because you can keep buying as many tools as you like, but that's more burden, more time, more resource to sort of go through and manage it. What's the smarter play to sort of do is look at the platforms, the tools that have the functionality you're looking for, but they integrate, right? And this goes back to my earlier point around how channel can always be seen as an afterthought within the go-to-market journey. If you've got the right tool that integrates, to your data points, so you can see, as an example, we're pivoting away from reseller, distributor, who sourced this deal, to more about, in this customer journey from start to finish, who influenced this, this customer, who helped, who kept the customer CSAT so high, who helped them sort of be trained and enabled. Because now, that can be up to as many as like 7 partners. So there isn't just a case of like, yep, they sold it, it's theirs. It's a much more complex environment that we're sort of seeing emerge as a result of that. And so the key thing really is about how you tie those systems together and make sure you have those key data points so go into your enterprise data warehouse, so into the snowflakes of the world, so that they can then be brought back in a useful and insightful way, so you can sort of see, okay, here's how we're evolving, here's where we could do better, here's how we can improve. And that goes hand in hand with the types of data that are being collected across the board as well.
All right, Kyle. So that's amazing. The level of complexity that you're defining, it makes sense for companies to invest, and not just on people and tools, but also a process level thinking. And someone like you with your background, is right there to help them. So thank you for being here. We'd love to have a follow-on conversation that we can go deeper into revenue ops and see what principles of those we can apply on the PartnerOps. But thank you for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Sugata.